One of the story arcs that we are trying to craft for the players is what I like to call a dark sci-fi Pinocchio story, which is starting in this world as something that is probably even less than human, and then gradually digging your way out of that towards becoming a real human again, evolving towards a proper transhumanist form, something that would be properly adapted towards life in space, as opposed to if we were to go to space now.
eFrontier is a survival game set in space, with a focus on self-reliance, moment-to-moment gameplay, and unlocking third-party development with an inclusive business model. I think it's bordering on survival horror almost, in this huge, vast, empty universe with the rotting vestiges of an old civilization that grew too large and eventually collapsed. We're focusing really on the exploration. They'll be able to go vast distances, and in order to do so, they'll really have to prepare for that journey. They'll have to take resources with them. They might be able to survive out in the cold, in the wilderness. There'll be places where people choose to gather because there's an abundance of natural resources. Much like in our real life, we expect people to do the same with their digital civilizations. You may choose to go out deep into the wilderness, but it will be hard to live there. It will be tough, it'll be brutal, but maybe you can forge your own destiny in that space.
When you are in space and you're flying around, just feel like you're just a small speck trying to navigate your way through this vast expanse of an ancient relic of a civilization that was there before you. We're excited to be introducing smart assemblies as a feature. So let's us open up this universe to a layer where other players will be able to modify and co-create this universe with us.
CCP's always worked with third-party developers. It's part of what makes EVE Online so good at what it does, and we have just taken that and amplified it with eFrontier. It's open source, and that means that you can go in and you can program directly into the game with our Smart Assemblies features.
Smart Assemblies are structures in space that you as a player will be able to modify using code that you are writing and then deploying onto the blockchain.
And as part of that, we're working to enshrine what we call digital physics into the immutable part of the blockchain.
In the frontier, everything is underpinned by digital physics. Very much in the same way that when we're walking around, when we are throwing things, putting glasses on tables, we don't think about how gravity is pulling us down. Within the virtual universe that we're creating together on eFrontier, blockchain is that physics layer that helps us to enshrine these rules to make sure that they are beyond anyone's touching, even ours at CCP.
An example of digital physics could be as simple as item locality. If an item exists, it has a location, it cannot be messed around with. If we make it so that you can't just teleport items around, then suddenly it becomes very important to be able to move things around inside the game. If that's enshrined at that base layer, everyone can look at this immutable blockchain and see this cannot be disrespected. You have to follow this.
There's nothing that you would be able to do with smart assemblies that wouldn't at its core be enshrined by this idea of digital physics that we're building into the game.
Despite our playtest still being in very early form, and the tools that we are providing to the parts of the player community who are engaging in this modding still very basic, despite all that, the things that we saw emerging were already very interesting, such as the thing that we provide them is basically a chest that you could find in any other survival game, but it comes with a layer of programmability.
We've had a King of the Hill type tournament where every player then tries to fight with another for control of a certain region of space.
They managed to connect these individual chests spread out across the universe and network in a clever way with clever interfaces. But you come up to this kiosk and it tells you, we are missing these resources here. If you give these resources to us, we're going to pay you. Through mechanics like this, it becomes an emergent living economy, which is not made by us. The only thing that we provided in there is just a singular building block. Now imagine if we add something like a smart turret unit to that equation. And then you can have these scenarios where you come to a kiosk, and if you do something that the kiosk doesn't like, it starts shooting you, or vice versa. You can start creating not just market systems, but emergent security systems, which can be much more interesting than the security systems that we normally see in interactive media in virtual worlds, which is, if you do something bad, the game will just punish you. This is more like a society is punishing you, and a certain part of the society that you choose to interact with, in a way that we would not be able to design. We will probably see player groups collapse, not because they got defeated by someone on the battlefield, but because they mismanaged their monetary policy, they didn't manage their inflation rate, or things like that.
So we have a role of a creator of the world. But a lot of the sort of world creation myth is like somebody creates and then people take over. So there will be a bit of creation activity that hopefully will fade out. Then there will be this activity of like the embassy economy is bootstrapping the quote-unquote the real economy. And then ideally these things fade away. The training wheels are completely off and the world sort of lives and breathes through the activity of the people playing.
The path that we're trying to follow is we are building these singular foundational building blocks and the core game mechanics, the engine itself, but then all of these higher level things such as social mechanics, the economy, and the higher level landscape of warfare, for example. All of these things are from the player base and are emerging already in more or less in real time whenever we're having playtests.
Our motto is we create virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. We want to build eFrontier such that as time goes on and it becomes more and more decentralized, the true long-term goal with open sourcing the Carbon development platform means that the ownership of the game itself will essentially reside in the citizens of the frontier. They choose to be here, they choose to live here in this virtual world, they should have a say in it.
We are trying to build this project around a set of universal pillars, from game mechanics to aesthetics. We are trying to create a world that is grounded in science. That's the first one. We are really trying to do our homework in terms of how these things would play out in real life. Once we establish some internal logic of the physics of the world, we are just sticking to them, both on the mechanical side of things and on the background world building side of things.
We want eFrontier to be grounded in science, and this goes all the way to the actual design of the universe itself within eFrontier. We actually have 2 people in the team with PhDs in astrophysics, and we are building this model that essentially is the 3 black holes of the trinary colliding and flinging star systems across the galaxy. This is a thing that's happening over millions of years, and we simulate the millions of years, and when we decide we want to, we take the snapshot, and that becomes the universe of the frontier itself. And this means that there'll be different areas of space that feel very different to play in and have very different effects and resources and threats, of course. The number one threat is almost always going to be other players, but we want people to be able to find mastery in areas of their own type of space. We found in EVE Online that by giving people different types of rules in different parts of the game, they come up with their own different types of cultures in those areas, and we want to just crank that up to 11 in eFrontier. We want people to perhaps be very close to the center of the universe and find that they're specializing in more harsh weather conditions within space weather, and people way out in the sticks, maybe it's a much more remote thing, requires much more logistical lifting, but it's perhaps less risk of running into other players. In our current build, we have approximately 20,000 star systems, and we're aiming for over 100,000. We want you to be able to go carve out your own area of space in the far reaches. Take your friends, head off into the forest, and find some place to build your own little camp in space.
The second one is that we are trying to craft a cruel survival experience where you are maybe not alone against the world, but you're more inclined to be in a small gang of friends trying to overcome the hostile universe and other player groups.
You're just washed up on a shore, you're alone, it's dark and cold, and the world is out to get you pretty seriously, and you have a tiny spaceship and everything takes enormous amount of effort.
It needs to be a pretty hostile world for a few reasons. One of them is that we have this empiric discovery from our past projects where, somewhat counterintuitively, this is a really good way to force people to band together, and this is something that we are trying to facilitate with this project. Sometimes we are referring to it as a civilization engine. We're trying to ensure that we end up there mechanically via things like introducing energy management into the experience, i.e. things are taking not just time or resources, but you need to put in some labor, some energy in there.
Every action has some sort of energy cost. For example, if you've mined an asteroid or you've mined the player who was mining the asteroid with your guns, suddenly you've got resources, and that has cost you some sort of energy to do that.
Now it's becoming much akin to a proper survival experience where, for example, if you just want to navigate from one star system to another, you suddenly need to be mindful of that in a similar way as someone who is going on an expedition would be mindful of things like having enough food with you, having enough fuel for your car or whatever your vehicle is.
It's something that means that you can't just perpetually fly around forever without eventually running out of energy. You will need to stop and do something. You could commit to going on a one-way expedition and then setting up some way to build more resources in that area. And if that is such a long way away, the fact that you've had to prepare and commit to going there, that makes the universe feel substantially bigger than infinite free travel, for example.
And of course, we're also trying to support it on an aesthetic side of things with the other mechanics, such as the occlusion mechanics, where you can hide behind objects and people cannot shoot at you, people cannot see you.
Completely changes the way combat feels. It means that the space environment around you becomes critically important, and your awareness of what's there and what you can't see becomes vital. You could be walking into a trap and you would never know it. You have to decide where the risk threshold for you is. And likewise, if you have plenty of friends, you could be setting up crazy types of traps to catch other people. And having that lack of perfect information is what actually allows that to happen. If you know everything around you, you're almost never going to make the wrong decision. Giving people that inability to know exactly what's there will really add some friction to the game. The opening line of the design document for both EVE Online and EVE Frontier is death is a serious matter, and it should be important. When you lose something in the game, it needs to mean something when that happens. And we find that when you have this cruel survival experience, then losses have meaning, things and your experiences in that world have very deep meaning. If you lose something and you can just easily replace it, then did you really lose it? So having that actual sense of loss means that there's a certain value in what you care about in the world. And this makes it a very dark world, and that is by design. Because when you build a dark world, the players themselves come in and they bring the light and they build their own utopias inside this dark world.
One of the story arcs that we are trying to craft for the players is what I like to call a dark sci-fi Pinocchio story, which is starting in this world as something that is probably even less than human. It's a cheap placeholder artificial body, and then gradually digging your way out of that towards becoming a real human again, which should coincide with things such as character creator features and stuff like that. And then going from there, if you wish so, evolving towards a proper transhumanist form, something that would be properly adapted towards life in space, as opposed to if we were to go to space now.
We also have a pillar on rebuilding a broken world. So the Frontier Galaxy itself has got rotting structures of a long-gone civilization. It is just stripped bare. There is very little infrastructure. There's little that really exists in that area. The players themselves are going to have to rebuild not only their own local areas, their own little base in space, but they're going to have to rebuild almost civilization itself. As part of that, we've introduced smart assemblies, and we'll be continuing to introduce further and further components that let you really build out this great base in space, whether it's just your own small encampment or whether it's a large industrial complex powered by hundreds of people working together.
We're really excited with what players will be able to do with smart assemblies. We are building out smart assemblies on a framework called MUD. We've implemented HTML5 rendering within the game client, and this allows people to switch in between what they would generally consider to be the normal game client and also the blockchain components seamlessly, so that you very often will not even realize when you are interacting with the blockchain stack. We believe that this allows players to then be able to interact with these smart assemblies in a way that has not yet been seen before and was not possible prior to the introduction of blockchain technology. But at the same time, if you're not going to be a programmer or a coder, then the collaborative nature of the universe that we're building out and the community that will form within that will let you leverage the skill set of other players so that everyone gets a really enjoyable gameplay experience.
We are a little bit more of an R&D company in our DNA than we are a pure games development company. It was pretty clear for some time that there are some interesting emergent technological opportunities out there around the blockchain space, for example. And one of the things that they're trying to achieve in there is this concept of autonomous worlds, which is a self-sufficient virtual world that can survive on its own. It doesn't need owners, it doesn't need a company to run it. And now that was way more interesting than all of this financial stuff in there. As we went down that path, what we discovered is a capacity for a sustainable approach to server-side modding, i.e. we can build a virtual world that is self-sustainable, that is not run by ourselves in the future, and that can be modified by players in real time.
So in this quest to remove all constraints, where the game literally lives through people playing it and nothing else is required, this idea of forever is connected with, okay, then it has to exceed everyone's lifespan because people don't live forever. And then you end up, okay, you need decentralization, you need to encrypt the state so nobody's cheating. You want it to be transactionally sound, you need a way to propagate the state, then you need a way for a compose on top of the state. You just very quickly end up with a blockchain. When we were building EVE Online, we decided to build on top of a database. Our choice of a database was hotly contested, at least in this community of people making MMO-like games. And never did we really position the game. EVE Online, the first database game. And we're not really looking to do that with eFrontier either. It is not really a blockchain game, no more than EVE is a database game. We're just being very explicit about it because it is a hot topic and we don't want to hide it away. It does use many stuff. A blockchain is involved, for sure. But it's more about the fact that it is distributed and not centralized. This is more like a peer-to-peer system where everyone can mod the server state in accordance to digital physics we have enshrouded into the world. EVE Online exists as a problem statement to be solved by a group of people. That enigma, which will be encoded into this world, will require even larger coordination of people to be able to do that, and then in competition with others. It is a little bit like our own world, really. EVE has taught us how powerful human collaboration can be. This element, for example, of the massive fleet fights in EVE Online was never written in any document, that thousands of spaceships would be fighting synchronously. To build the military logistics to achieve that, setting world records and no game consoles. But this we could not have designed. This is an invention by EVE players, but it does show us the powerfulness of collaboration. And obviously, from building the pyramids to landing on the moon, these are all massive collaboration efforts of massive nations taking place over decades. And the more we can train ourselves to solve impossible problems at massive scale and coordination through this, we might be able to increase the collaborative spirit in the world overall.
Or we are not competing with any other projects out there in the world, be it games or movies or books, because we can position ourselves in a way where we are competing with the rest of the universe instead, with the things that haven't been done just yet.
We're really excited for you to join us on the frontier. To get your hands on Founder Access Packs, which are available right now, head on over to efrontier.com.